Hello, Jane Miller here. Thanks for tuning in today. You have reached the Success and Attitudes introduction. So here we go. You can see here on the slide our website. Please go here for a couple things. We have some resources out there for you. I have some homework papers for you. What you do is go to the website and then click on the 2012 button, and you'll see all the resources that you need to launch 2012 so that you can figure it out, get it done, achieve more, and enjoy it all the while. Now, I do appreciate the fact that you've started to launch 2012. You know, there's never a convenient time to look at all this stuff, so I do appreciate that you've just went ahead to get it done. So let me talk a little bit about the process that we're going to go over in the next couple months here as you stay along with us here at Miller Institute. One of the things that I make a distinction of in my business is the differentiation between training and development. So training, I see as basically teaching someone a new set of skills, and development then could be seen as using your skills more often and more effectively to get what you want. So while we're not really a training company, we're a development company, whether that's personal or professional. One of the things we know is to really capitalize on all of the information I'm going to share with you throughout this course and our time together. It is absolutely vital that we keep an open mind. Think about it. Do you think you have an open mind? Let's test that a little. Now tell me, how many squares do you see? I'll give you a few moments here. You know, I use this example. It's a simple one, but because depending on who you read, behavioral scientists tell us that the average person uses only somewhere between 3 and 25% of their potential resources and talent. Only 25%. Thomas Edison lamented that he didn't even use that much. Can you imagine? And look at the results he had. So think about it. If you're running a business or a sales territory or a department or your family, if you're missing out on some of the squares, what else are you leaving on the table every day? So let's look at this just quickly. How many squares do you see? Well, of course, you have the large one that encompasses all the rest. That could be one. Then you see the 16 small squares. But what about each corner as its own square, this corner, and so on? And what about the 9 blocks? Here's a 9 block and the other 9 blocks. And then we could often also go into, say, the white is a square, but actually the border is a square. So those can be counted up to 46 squares. 46. I'm going to say that that's your homework today. See if you can find all 46. Here's another. You may have seen the 9 dots exercise before. So what I want you to do is use 4 straight lines and connect all the dots without lifting your finger from the screen, or if you copy this over to the piece of paper, without lifting your pen from the paper. So if you've done this before, I'd suggest that you add another row of dots and see how you might be able to do that. I use this illustration so that we can tap into the idea of, for example, more of those 46 squares from the previous slide. But with the 9 dots, what you have to remember is we often operate inside a box of our own making. And then we wonder why things are so difficult. So send me this, would you, in an email? Show me how you've done it. The secret is you have to go outside the dots to get it to work. And I'll give you the solution. Now, I wish I could just point my finger to you and you and you and say, this is what I feel you're using in terms of your potential, but I can't, and I won't pretend that I can. At the same time, I do believe in the issue, though, that the issue being people don't use what they have. So look at this exercise next. More homework for you. You've likely seen some life and professional, business and professional, personal and professional wheels over time. Think about this. In the center of the wheel may indicate 0% of your potential on any given day. And on the outer ring, you might say you're using all 100% of your potential. So in each piece of the pie, shade in the amount of potential you believe you're using in each piece, whether that's personal or professional. Now, if you were to strip away then the outer circle and just be left with the kind of shape that you've made from where you've shaded, how would these two wheels roll? Now, we're not talking about perfect balance here, but we are talking about some sort of balance for you so that you can use the potential that you have. Those areas that you have shaded more than half, that may indicate that those are areas of pleasure and fulfillment in your life. And those that perhaps you've shaded less than 50% may indicate areas of dissatisfaction or some pain. Finally, what you've done in this quick exercise is to paint a picture of your self-image. You've identified who you are now versus who you believe you have the capability to become. So if you could find a way to use a higher percentage of your potential that you've left gone untapped, what would you do? What would it do for you? In other words, what difference would I see in you 6 months or a year from now if you're able to tap in to that extra potential that you're leaving on the table? There's really 3 factors involved in order for you to become what you're capable of becoming and succeed on your terms. One is attitude development. Another is interpersonal skills, and the third is goal achievement. Sounds simple, and they work. What I'd like to do now is cover each one at a time so that you can see what we're talking about and how they're all related to each other. We begin our process by dealing with attitudes and then getting involved with attitude development. Let's get some definitions going first. When we talk about attitudes, we say that they are feelings or outlooks, and they're internal to us. They differ from an opinion because, while our opinions can change relatively rapidly from day to day or week to week, our attitudes tend to be a little more stable, a little more fixed, a little more ingrained. The thing to recognize about attitudes is they're really habits. They're really habits of thought. I'd love to stand here and say that everything is based on stimulus, causes thought, causes response, but I'd be lying to you. It's really a stimulus response world. The thought has been taken out of it. Think about this. You're driving down the highway. It's a wonderful bluebird day, gorgeous out, beautiful warm temperatures. You have your windows down, maybe the stereo is playing your favorite song, and since you're not in a particular hurry, you're just cruising along, probably going the speed limit. And as you come around a curve, you see a police car sitting on the side of the road. Now, what happens to your right foot? Of course, you intellectually weren't speeding. You weren't. But because of your habit of thought about getting tickets, like embarrassment of sitting on the side of the road, it's like our right foot just developed a habit or a mind of its own. Habit of thought. That comes from our attitude towards something. What I'm really trying to communicate is that there's a link, a direct link between the way we think and the way we act. So let's add personality. When we define personality, we say it is the outer expression of our inner attitude. So when people come in contact with us, they're responding to our personality. That's what they see, feel, hear. And this is really an outgrowth of our attitudes. Let's say you're a manager and you have a number of people reporting to you. You know that there's a communication problem within the group. You also believe that your entire group are the biggest jerks that ever walked on the face of the earth. Now, you as a manager could read 100 books on improving the communications. You'll still never solve that problem because your attitude is getting in the way. But let's define success and keep it simple. We like to say at Miller Institute, success is the continuous achievement of our predetermined personal goals. This means that if we are not as successful as we want to be or think we should be on our own terms, well, then we need to ask ourselves, what part of my personality is moving me closer to success and what parts are taking me further away? So we look at our attitudes and say, which attitudes, which habits of my thought are moving me closer to success and what's taking me further away? What are my attitudes toward myself, my line of work, my company, my coworkers, my customers? Wow, personality. I've read that it's estimated that up to 95% of our basic personality is formed before the age of 5. 5? Whew. We're only heading to kindergarten at age 5. That means in order to understand how you're behaving today, we need to go back to that real early period in our lives and think about the first 3 words that most babies and toddlers learn to say. Maybe it's mama, dada, but more frequently, the first word a baby speaks is no. Wouldn't you agree that most of our attitudes are more negative than they are positive? Would you agree that people tend to think more often about what's going to go wrong than what's going to be right? Let's look at it logically. When a baby goes to touch a stove, what does the parent say? Don't touch. Or when the toddler goes to write on the wall, don't write on the wall. And as the child grows older and gets a little more sophisticated, so do the words we use. We say don't. Don't touch the stove or you'll get burned. Don't write on the wall or you'll make your father mad. As the child gets older and more sophisticated, those truisms are taught to the child. Let me give some examples. How many of these can you finish? Don't bite off more than you can chew. Children should be seen and not. Don't go where you're not. Don't speak unless you're. Don't talk to. I bet you got 100%. Good for you. Now, give me a positive statement that you heard frequently when you were a young child. That's the point. What I'm simply saying is when we look at the majority of things that we're exposed to in our early years, we recognize that a great deal of them are negative. Now, that was during the time that we were developing our basic attitudes. So of course they're going to be more negative than positive, but you might think your attitudes are great right now, and that might be true. The fact is, though, that the heavy influence of the early years was likely negative and had an effect on our attitude. So did anyone ever turn to you and say, okay, now you're old enough to talk to strangers? Maybe if you're in sales, your boss has told you that. Or how about, it's time that you should bite off more than you can chew? Or did anyone ever say, you can now be heard, not just seen? In sales, as I mentioned, one of the biggest problems is call reluctance. So it's not unusual for people who have everything in the world going for them, intelligence, good appearance, to have picking up the phone and calling strangers their biggest problem. Why is it that we can punch a number of digits into the phone and we could dial anyone in the world as long as we talked to them before, but try to pick up the phone and talk to a stranger? Some of us have an issue with that. Now, of course, our parents and we as parents did these things to protect our children. So I'm not saying that we did bad things. I'm just saying that most of the early conditioning was on the negative. And with all these negatives in this early conditioning, you begin to think, and we begin to know that it's evident that attitudes are developed, whether they're negative or positive, so they can be changed. William James, you may know him, the father of American psychology, said the greatest discovery of our generation is that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. You can change attitudes. It has to be a conscious attempt, though. And unless you make that conscious attempt, because of the heavy negative influence during our early stages of our life, your thought process can tend to be in terms of the negative, what you can't do instead of what you can do. Let's look at how we develop attitudes. The first way is really by impact. The second is by discovery, and the third is by spaced repetition. Let me tell you what that means. So here's an example of impact. Someone has a massive coronary and says, that's it, it's time for me to spend more time with my family, my friends, I'm going to walk in the park barefoot, and so on and so on. Another example of impact. You hear an incredibly powerful speaker and your whole life improves, your marriage improves, your kids get better grades, and your dog doesn't even have fleas anymore. That is miraculous. That's impact. The problem with it, it's hard to replicate. So you'd have to have that powerful speaker with you every day. Now, if you're exposed to an idea one time, as in our chart, you're lucky if you recall half of it the next day. After 2 days, you might recall 25%. After 16 days, you're lucky if you recall even just 2% of that wonderful, powerful speaker. However, if I asked you what significant event happened on September 11, 2001, most people can tell me exactly where they were and what they were doing when they got the news that America was being attacked. That's an example of an impact situation that happened to you one time, but you'll remember it forever. The next way adults learn is through discovery. That's like, ooh, I could have had a V8. Where all of a sudden something that we're looking at seems different than before. Kind of an aha, if you will. The third way that we learn, and this is the way our attitudes were developed, by the way, is through spaced repetition. The estimation is that if we're exposed to the same concept or idea 6 times over 6 days, you will keep 62% of it. And you'll retain it for up to 15 years of your life. So what we're talking about here is long-term development, not just short-term training. And that's what we do here at Miller Institute. An example of this might be the multiplication tables. Okay, let me test you. How much is 4 times 2? 8 times 4? Good. 6 times 7? Good. Now, how much is 14 by 17? I don't even know. I have to get a calculator out for that one or a sharp pencil. Now, how long has it been since you actually studied the multiplication tables, but you still remember them? Probably up to multiples of 10, 11, or 12. You learned the multiplication tables through repetition, didn't you? Now, how about finishing this jingle with me? To demonstrate another example of the power of spaced repetition. 2 all-beef patties, special sauce. Now let me ask you, how many of you actually made a conscious attempt to learn what McDonald's puts on its hamburgers? No, it was the spaced repetition. Other examples. What company uses the saying, just do it? Right on. The power of repetition is tremendous. Most importantly, it's not a conscious kind of retention, but when it's stimulated, you respond almost automatically. And the same thing happens with our attitudes. That's the point. So you can develop your attitudes using spaced repetition. And the way to do it is through developing skills. Now let's look at this curve. If we were to graph people or management knowledge, wouldn't you agree that on the personal contribution level, if you look at that, 90% of the success for management is going to come from their people skills, right? The individual contributors down here, workhorses, our frontline, their success mostly comes from their expertise on technical issues. And only 10% from people issues. So what happens when someone becomes a supervisor overnight? Your supervisor comes to you at the end of the day and says, guess what? You got the promotion tomorrow. You are the supervisor. Whew. They come in with a ton of technical knowledge, but very little on the people side. So how do people go about gathering and getting this people or management knowledge? A lot of times you're promoted within at a company, and then maybe you get some supervisory training. But where is it that they pick up the people skills they need to succeed? Many times it's role modeling. But what's the cost in dollars if we don't train our folks in this way? Let's talk a little bit about figuring out what you want and then how to get it. A lot of times people will say to me, Jane, how can I make more money at my job? Actually, the answer is pretty simple. Become worth more, whether that's with your company or whether that is the value that you provide to your clients and your customers. We simply have to become worth more. And how are you going to become worth more tomorrow than you are today? My answer is you have to put something in before you get it out. We're going to talk about life goals in the seminar that we're doing today and for the next few weeks. I'm going to be giving you homework next time around. So this was the first step, just to think about your attitudes. Next time you tune in, we will be looking at figuring out what it is you want. And then later, we'll go on to look at how we're going to get it. Have a great day. Don't forget to send me your assignments. Thank you.